We talk a lot about the challenges that women face, the adversity, the biases that women face. And the truth is when we look at a lot of these studies, it's not just men that are affecting women. A lot of times it's women that are also holding these biases. And that's the thing I like to people to understand is the biases exist and women also have the bias. We also have these underlying beliefs. And so it's important for us really, I know we always want others to change, but I always think the best change starts within ourselves. And it's important for us, especially as women, to really understand these issues so we can make sure that we are not just not causing the problem, but we're also part of the solution.
Hey friends, it's Mary, and this is the Mary Jervich Show, a podcast that champions today's working women to gain the clarity, confidence, and courage to uplevel your career while strengthening your faith and living your dream life, all in record time. We'll cover topics like career advancement, leadership, personal development, faith, and health and wellness, so you can intentionally create a career and life full of more abundance, joy, and love. Let's get started.
Hey friends, welcome on into this week's episode of the Mary Jervich Show. I am so excited to have you here. Now, if you joined us last week, we were talking all about our inner circles and how important and how powerful it is to have an inner circle that's in alignment with what God wants for you and what your goals are. And today's guest could not be more perfect to follow this up. And as our first guest of the new year, I could not be more excited to introduce you to Amber Tichenor. That is Dr. Amber Tichenor. She has her degree in workplace psychology, and she's the founder of 2B Coaching and Consulting. She's a thought leader on the topic of women's rivalry. Yes, that's right, ladies. We are going to go there today. Amber has 20 plus years of experience as an organizational change, strategy, and leadership consultant, where she has helped to guide businesses through transformational change. She also recently published her book, Behind Frenemy Lines, Rising Above Female Rivalry to Be Unstoppable Together. You can get that on Amazon, or she even has the audio version. You can check that out on Audible. Amber's goal is to promote collaboration over competition. Don't we just love that? We do, right? She wants to empower women to find their voice, leave the rivalry behind, and team up with a community of like-minded women who support each other to be unstoppable together. And ladies, before I bring Amber up, I just want to encourage you. You may be thinking, I am not a part of this female rivalry thing. And you know what? I have felt like that in the past too. And I have since realized I was also part of the problem. And so I would just encourage everyone to listen to this message today, female or not, whether you feel like you may align with this or not, because you may be seeing it in the workplace. And sometimes we can unknowingly be contributing to it. But enough from me. Let's bring in the amazing Dr. Tichenor. Amber, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mary. I'm so honored to be here with you. And I just got the chills by you talking. I have listened to a couple of your episodes, obviously, but I didn't listen to your recent one. And so talking about the inner circle, that's amazing that the timing of everything. So
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Amber, we know that you are this workplace psychologist, but how did this female rivalry stuff, how did this come about in your work?
I'm excited to be here. Well, it's a crazy topic to hone in on. I get that a lot because it's like, what? Of all things that you could study, why this? So, for the work I do, when I was getting my dissertation, I had to focus in on a topic in the work environment. And I really knew in my heart I wanted it to be something to do with women. I wasn't sure yet. So, I was working at a well known company as a consultant, and I saw this behavior occurring. And I call it the elephant in the boardroom because good women were walking, and yet nothing was being done about the ugly behavior. And when the women would leave, it was as if the negative behavior was being rewarded because the people that were instigating the behavior were staying, and nothing was done about it. And so it was creating a toxic work environment, but also it didn't just impact the two women at hand. Everybody around you could feel it. And so it was like you were walking on eggshells. And so up until that point, I'd had little bits of rivalry impact me, but nothing big or huge. And so I got my dissertation and I kept collecting stories because I was so fascinated by what women were sharing. And I found, well, obviously in the work environment, it adds a whole different level. But it happens to women on a daily basis. It can be in your neighborhood, it can be at school or at church or in your family. And fast forward 10 years later, I'm in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm working on a different project. I have little kids, and I am dealing with a woman at work that I just couldn't find my groove with. And I kept putting it back on me. Like, I would talk to her, like, how can we improve our communication? What can I do to make this better? Because, our end results were the same. We just were not working well together. And she was on that project, my boss. So I began to dread going to work. I would get a pit in my stomach on Sundays. I hate it. Like, my weekend was consumed thinking about going back to work on Monday. And one morning I was driving into work and I was talking to my mom on the phone, and she said, "Honey, I just hate to see how you are doubting yourself all because of this woman." And if I would have been a cartoon character, I would have had one of those, big light bulbs over my head. I had this aha moment, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm in this. This is what I've studied, and I'm in it, and I didn't see it. And if I know it as in depthly as I do to write a PhD dissertation about it, what's it doing to women who don't have this knowledge? So that became my why. And I went in and I quit that project. My husband was like, most people give a little bit of notice. And I'm like, I couldn't do it anymore. So that's how my business and my focus came to be, as I like to call it, to help other women understand what the behavior is, but more so that we could talk about it, because it does exist and it's commonly not talked about.
Well, thank you for being bold and courageous and confident to bring this to us today. It isn't something that's talked about a lot. And so help us just to understand, what is female rivalry?
So it's a loaded word. It's not a black and white behavior. There's a lot of different nuances. I think it's a very gray behavior. It can stem from multiple things. It often will begin out of competition or jealousy, but it truly is, it can come at you in different ways too. It's often very passive aggressive. When it's occurring, you may not know what it is. It's frequently not a tangible behavior, so it's hard to share with somebody else. Here's when it starts. Maybe Mary, you have it out for me, and you'll say something to me behind a closed door, and I'll think, well, why is Mary treating me this way? I haven't done anything to her. So over time, you'll begin to doubt yourself and feel a little slighted, but it's again hard to name because it's intangible. And frequently, it stems from the need for control. Maybe there's less room at the top, especially in a work environment. She might want what you have or want you out of the picture, or she simply doesn't like you. There are many reasons that contribute. Maybe it's how she was raised. Maybe she grew up in an environment where she's mirroring behavior of other women, and so that is an acceptable behavior. Maybe she grew up with a thought of you're less than, so she's always trying to prove herself. Maybe she doesn't like herself. And so one of my favorite lines is, women who love themselves love other women. And so it could just be that she's unhappy in her own skin, and you happen to be in the path at the wrong time, and you're the receiving end of her behavior. So there are a lot of faucets that drive the behavior, and no one story is ever the same.
So what I'm hearing from you is, if you are on the other end of this, we say the victim of this, right? It's not you. There's nothing that you could be doing differently that would change this person's behavior, because it's not actually something that you're doing.
Yes.
It's a thought, a feeling, a belief that the other person has that's causing them to act out in this way. So it's almost a little bit, it can feel irrational, because but I think sometimes as women, and I think this topic is so important because
yes,
we talk a lot about the challenges that women face, the adversity, the biases that women face. And the truth is when we look at a lot of these studies, it's not just men that are affecting women. A lot of times it's women that are also holding these biases. And that's the thing I like to people to understand, is the biases exist, and women also have the bias. We also have these underlying beliefs. And so it's important for us, really, I know we always want others to change, but I always think the best change starts within ourselves. And it's important for us, especially as women, to really understand these issues so we can make sure that we are not just not causing the problem, but we're also part of the solution. And so that's just so beautiful that we're covering this today.
Yeah. What you said it so perfectly, but I want to just sometimes you could be part of the problem. I want to put that out there too. So, what I tell my children is when a behavior is being, you only have control over your own behavior. You do absolutely not have control over somebody else's. And so, yes, if you are in the thick of this type of ugliness, it will feel awful and it's hard to understand. I like that you said it's irrational because it is completely irrational. There's no rhyme or reason as to why it's occurring, and chances are you are truly, like I said, on the in the pathway of somebody that, if it's not you, it's going to be somebody else. One thing I do firmly believe that we always can do is do a self check. It's good to look at, am I contributing to this behavior? If so, how? And just, look inward to see if you could be triggering that person for some reason or for maybe she's shy and not as outspoken or outgoing, or maybe there are cultural differences. So if you flip it inward just to see what you are doing, if anything, that's always something good to do just to make sure. But chances are it could just be her.
Absolutely. Well, I want to just dive a little bit more into this definition because the one thing that makes this unique, right? Female rivalry, it's I'm guessing, right? And I would love for you to share with me. Is it that
Yeah.
the women that are expressing this, will they not have these same kind of feelings or actions or behaviors towards men? Do they specifically target women at some level, or could it be with men as well?
I have not specifically studied men. So my guess is, and I haven't studied I've only studied women. So what in my research, it's usually women against women, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist because I have heard those stories as well. I think that with women, so when I initially began my research, I had to have a grounding theory, and there was nothing out there on female rivalry. So I had to go to theories of aggression. So when babies are born, boys and girls, they are born with the same traits. They have the same traits of aggression. And it's about the age of 7 or 8 that little girls begin to form social intelligence. So that comes a few years before it does in boys. Until that point, the kids are rough and tumbling and hitting and, being physically aggressive more so than with the social intelligence. That's when the indirect and the passive aggression can come. So they're using words, they're using thoughts and feelings as a form of aggression versus just a physical attribute. Typically, you'll see in men, and again, there may be differences, that let's say you have Bob and Bill in the boardroom and they're mad about something with each other. Well, Bob, I don't agree with what you said. Well, Phil, I think you're wrong. And they may yell and get aggressive and loud, but an hour later, they could be on the golf course having a beer and it's totally behind them and it's like nothing ever happened. It's harder for women to get to that point. Women often compare themselves in the view of other women. So our sisters, our friends, our mothers, we see our identity through the eyes of others. And with that, other things also come into play. So if you and I were to argue, it could be, well, Sarah, I don't like your car. Well, Amber, I don't like what clothes you're wearing. Like other things start to come into it and it festers and it grows and it gets bigger. And so it's just typically, and there are differences, but men and women handle how they are being aggressive with each other. And so that's how it's showing up for women in this passive aggressive way.
So, Amber, you alluded to some feelings that we have when we're on the receiving end of this rivalry. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Like what is the experience really like? And, because I feel like, part of it is just people are managing us or leading us. There's different personalities. So how do we really know that we're facing this? What would we be feeling?
You feel all sorts of feels. And often when women are in it, they don't talk about this behavior. Since it's so intangible and so hard to describe, it's often not talked about until you're out of it. I know when I experienced it, I was contributing how I was feeling to not liking my job, that I needed a change in my job. And so I was unhappy and that was seeping over into my life. It just wasn't staying at work. And so I call it, you lose your sparkle and your shine. Your world feels gray. A lot of women, one thing I hear from all women who are in it, whether they feel it at the time, whether they can vocalize it at the time, is that they feel lonely. They don't know who they can talk to. And I think that's because we don't talk about this subject that much. It's hard to voice it, to share with others. So loneliness, sadness, you begin to feel unsure about yourself. and doubt yourself. A lot of women have shared with me that they began, if they were in it for a long time, they began to have unexplained health issues. So stomach aches, headaches, not sleeping properly, very stressed out, anxious. The list goes on. In my research, there was not one good feeling that came out of this type of behavior, except maybe later when they were able to forgive the situation and move forward, because then there was that relief. But women, it's a big deal. And I've had so many women say they don't have female friends because they don't know who they can trust, that they will never work with another woman again, that they will never work on an all-female team. And that's tragic. Like, we're half the population. And when you find a good circle or tribe and you know what it feels like, it can be the best thing in the world. But if you have no one, you're lonely.
That's a lot of feelings. That's really hard to have to be going through. And, it feels like what you said is it's not really something we can define so definitively. And so sometimes it's hard to explain.
Yeah.
But what does this look like when it shows up in the workplace? How can we identify this?
So I'll use my experience and then I'll share some of what others have shared with me. She was the woman that I was having conflict with, was in charge of my project. And so I began to be uninvited to meetings. She started taking work away. She knew that there were certain types of work that as our project team, I liked better. She stopped giving me those. She gave me other, like kind of the work I didn't like. I remember one day I was sitting in my desk and a coworker walked by and said, "Aren't you going to the meeting?" And I said, "No, I didn't get invited." So, taking away information, key critical information for me to do my job. But it was all kind of done on the sly. Other women shared that they were maybe moved to a different part of the building where they couldn't, mingle with coworkers or colleagues. That's changed a little bit now since, remote is so prevalent, but there's lots of little nuances that can happen. Maybe taking credit for your work. You've done something, but then she'll say, "Well, I did this," or saying, "That's a bad idea." And then later on in a meeting, bring it up as her new idea. So there's lots of little nitpicky ways that it can show up, but if you look and you think one might not be so bad, but if it's a continuing constant thing, it's like a snowball effect, because you have all these sorts of things hitting you and you're kind of blown away. And it's especially difficult if you are in the working environment and this individual is senior to you. So she has control of your paycheck or your promotion activity. It can make it very difficult to know what to do or how to deal with it.
Yeah, that sounds really challenging. And what I'm almost hearing behind this is it's done intentionally. Is that part of it? It's a knowingly. So it's done intentionally and it's not done like across the board. That was something I learned years ago because I had a tendency to take things very personal, and I'm a person that likes to do things right, kind of, recovering perfectionist, and
Yeah.
maybe I'm still going through perfectionism, but trying to continue to work through that. But I would sometimes take things hard. And I was taught, just look at what they're doing because you're taking it personal, and
Yeah.
it might not be personal. So is this how they act with every other person? Or is this something that's only being done with you or said select group of people, but it's not kind of aligning? Like, it's not like, okay, because I always look at, well, is your work done? Maybe you just don't like confrontation. Like, did you not do something properly? Are you missing steps? Is there really a fault that maybe the other person? Because one thing I've learned through all my studies and just working with so many different leaders and business owners, managers are
Yeah.
really uncomfortable giving
Yeah.
feedback, really
Yes, it's
uncomfortable holding
hard.
people accountable. So most of them don't. And so sometimes when we do get this from some people, I feel like almost like an attack. But what you're saying is it's an intentional action to kind of make your life a little bit harder, kind of make sure you don't succeed as much as somebody else might or as much as they would. And it's that intentionality behind it. And it's the singling out that kind of separates it from just somebody's bad personality trait or poor management style.
Yes. Well, I think you have two great points here. I think there is poor management. Who likes to give critical feedback, or improve upons, as if you coin it in the right word. That's still never easy, but that's a part of your job. I think when it is intentional, it is the out to get you type of thing. And I've had a couple of women, this will maybe help answer your question or what the statement you shared. One woman, she was in the military, and she had this, there were very few women doing what they were doing, and so this woman was in charge of her promotional track, and some of the stories she shared with me were completely heinous. They were so awful. So fast forward, that woman retired. And this individual met up with her several years later, I think at a wedding or some social event. And she said, "You would not believe it. She came up and hugged me and acted like I was her best friend in the whole world and that we hadn't seen each other and we're catching up." And she said she was the worst woman to me on the job. So I think my gut and the research would say that woman was threatened by her in that position. So once you're out of the threatening position, then you're not a threat anymore. So you can be kind. So that's the intentional part of it. I think too, there are women that might be doing it to multiple women, but because this behavior isn't talked about, it's not open for discussion. Another story comes to mind that was shared in my book. One gal was so physically upset, visibly and physically upset. She went into the restroom and she became ill. And another colleague walked in and said, "Oh no, not you too," because she had witnessed it and she knew. So it was happening to her as well. But I think when it's a taboo topic, you don't feel comfortable talking about it, especially if you're in a working environment that's not psychologically safe, where you feel vulnerable to raise your hand and say, "This isn't working. What can we do?" So there's all different ways, but if somebody is intentional, she's probably pretty good at it.
Yeah, and that's so heartbreaking, and it just the stories that people have shared with me over the years, and even just recently, I can see where this is probably the root of it, because they are these women that are in these upper level, and it's not always the women in the upper level position. It's not always that. I've seen it at other levels
Yeah.
too, but it's at all levels. It's not just there, but
No.
it's this unique situation, because it's like they don't take the opportunities they have to be a great leader, to be a great manager, to really help you to succeed. It really is about kind of not always attacking, but not always setting you up for that best success or giving you what you need to be ultimately successful, which also undermines the whole company. And so that's just so sad.
Yes. Well, and I think I look at it as, I think there's a scarcity mindset when that occurs. And so let's say you're a coach and I'm a coach. Even if we're coaching on the same topic and maybe have a similar group of like women that we're coaching to, how you are doing it, how I would do it is going to be vastly different just because we're different, unique people. So I look at it as a piece of pie. If I have a piece of blackberry pie and I cut it, it's not going to be perfectly even, but it's still going to be kind of the same. And so if you and I can link up and have a camaraderie with each other, like, maybe my docket is full and I know I'll say, "Hey, Mary's a great coach. I'm not taking clients right now, but Mary is." Or maybe I meet somebody that I know might not right fit that well with who I am, but I think you might be a great fit. Like, you can refer, and then it becomes more of an abundance mindset versus the scarcity mindset. And so I think it's sometimes flipping the lens, that where it's not less than, it's like, what can we do together? And it doesn't take away from your piece of pie.
That is so true. And that's one thing I try to teach women. It's like when you get more, it doesn't mean somebody else gets less. And we need to have
Yes.
this abundance. And if we help somebody else get more, it doesn't mean that you will then get less. It doesn't
No.
work like that. It's not this piece of pie that we think about. That was such a great analogy and exactly how we think about it. So you also use the word frenemy. So what
Oh,
is
yes.
a frenemy?
A frenemy is a joint word of a friend and an enemy. And I was actually very surprised when I was doing research. Sigmund Freud used to use that word about himself long ago, and he talked about it being within him. So he was, obviously struggling with some things internally, but it's somebody maybe that you might say is a friend, but when you're not together, you're not really sure what's going on behind the scenes. So if you're sitting at a table and you get up, you're not really sure if she has your back. And there's lots of different types of frenemies that can show up. Bottom line, if a frenemy is somebody that you know, if you get up from the table, that they're supporting you if they are your true friend. If you have doubts about that, I think sometimes you just need to look inward and say, am I getting out of this relationship what I'm putting into it? Because it can be very time consuming. It can be drain your energy. It can make you feel all the feels if you have a so-called frenemy that you think is your friend but really isn't.
Yeah. And so, what are some like warning signs? How can we identify, or is it just that feeling that we have?
So, a lot of times I think it's the gut feeling, but I also think there are some key signs. Maybe you have a friend that you've been friends with forever and she always calls when she has a problem. And so she wants to tell you all about it and help you fix it. And then when you say, but oh, yeah, I didn't have such a great work week at work. Can I share with you what's been going on? Oh, I'm sorry, I've got to go. Like it's always all about her. And so that's one, if it's not a reciprocated relationship, that can be one sign. Maybe somebody that gaslights you or cuts you down or isn't happy for your successes when you're winning. And you're thinking, well, gosh, I'm there for you. Why aren't you sharing, why aren't you equally as excited for me when I just got this, going on this trip or something. And, I was so excited when you got this last year. And that's another one. Maybe, aren't sharing your excitements. Somebody that is, putting you down or gets those little digs in that I call them backhanded compliments, where it's said on the pretense of being nice, but it makes you feel kind of icky and gooey after they've said it. Like, oh, that didn't feel like that was a genuine compliment. Those are three that I can think of. I'm a big believer. I call it your inner whisper, but going with that gut feeling. If something doesn't feel right, if you're putting a lot more into a relationship than what you're receiving, and I don't think it's about going into a relation thinking this is what I'm going to get, because I think all relationships ebb and flow. But in the end, if you look back over the time you've been with that person and it doesn't feel right, I think you really have to focus in on what that feeling is and why.
Yeah, that's so good. So good. And so important that we can identify that. Thank you for
Yeah.
making that so clear to us. So, Amber, share with us, how can we overcome these types of behaviors, whether it's the female rivalry or the frenemies? How do we overcome these?
So there are multiple ways, and of course, the experience may differ. At work may be a little different than a friend, but I think going back to what we just talked about is that gut feeling. If something doesn't feel right, I think you have to look internally and ask yourself why. And sometimes that's not easy. It's not easy to reflect. I've had a lot of women share that, well, we've been friends since our kids met in daycare, or, I met her in college. But if you always feel like behind your back, she's talking about you, or, maybe now since your kids were little in daycare, now they're in high school and you don't have as much in common, sometimes you just have to reevaluate. And I'm not saying just give up on your friendships, but they have to be purposeful and authentic. And I know the older I get, it's my circle gets maybe a little smaller, and I'm okay with that, but I know they're my trusted people. And there's a lot of talk about, relationships, people breaking up or whatever, but it's okay to break up in a friendship too. It's hard, but it does happen. So at work, if it's occurring, one of my main things is always document, 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 because it's intangible and it's hard to see what's going on. If you are writing down what's occurring over time, you're going to begin to see a story evolve. It will tell you what's going on. And so if it's at work, if you maybe want to approach the individual one-on-one, maybe ask them if they want to have a cup of coffee or take a walk. Talk first one-on-one to see if maybe you can work out what's going on. But also keep in mind that don't rely on expectations to come out of that conversation. You're not guaranteed that they're going to see things the way you're seeing them, or that you're going, get closure, or things are going to change. I know when I talked to my gal in my situation, I said, I feel like we can communicate better. What can I do? And she said, well, no, we don't have a problem at all. And I knew in my gut that was not right, but she denied it. So be prepared for that. I think also at work, while you're documenting and you have your story, if you want to bring another person in, like another leader, or even if you go to HR, you have to have your story ready to share. It can't just be a she said, she said. So you'll have to have some proof of things that have happened. But maybe maybe if you're in meetings, maybe make sure you have somebody there with you. Or if you go to HR, you're talking about promotions or raises or whatever you're talking with, just make sure somebody's there that has your back. But also, you have to look, what are your trigger points at work or in any situation? So if you know that this individual is going to say something to you, or something will set you off, just kind of be aware ahead of time of what may be your trigger point. And also, I think it's good to, work can seem long sometimes. If you're in the office, maybe have something every day to look forward to. Maybe you're going to go, after you get out of work, it's a nice day, go have a walk with a good girlfriend. Maybe you're going to go have a glass of wine with somebody, or go play games, or whatever you might do. Have something that makes you happy to look forward to escape the situation a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's good. And it was interesting that you said about the promotions or bringing somebody else in for the meetings. That's actually one of the things I teach, and one of the
Yeah.
most powerful things about them creating a promotion plan and setting their own meeting time instead of just waiting, because male or female, it
Yes.
doesn't matter. That direct manager that you have, they may not be the best person to advocate for you. They may have that fear if you rise that's cutting them off. All of these things can happen. And so I highly believe in enlisting another person, unless the person above you have a complete full trust for, and you know that they're good at negotiating as well, because that's the other part that happens. If this person, you have that conversation, right, and they're this frenemy, or there's this rivalry going on, and you're having this conversation about promotion, they may say to your face, oh yeah, that sounds great, I'll have to go talk to these people about it. And then they come back, and who knows what conversation they had on the other side of that door. And they might just not be good at having those conversations, or so many things could be happening. But I love adding that extra layer in. I feel like that's so helpful. And the other thing that was kind of popping up is, went back to something I said earlier, but
Yeah.
really not internalizing it and taking it personally,
Yes.
because we do have to work with so many different personalities, so many different people. And as you said, it's usually an insecurity. So while it's not right, it's not fair, we don't have to be the victim of it, even
Yes.
though we're on the receiving end, because we can, as you said, we are in charge of how we react
Yes.
to the behaviors that are happening. And so just to not take it as a personal attack, because even if it's only happening to you, it's still not necessarily personal if we
Yes.
don't frame it that way in our minds.
It's so true. It feels personal. It feels very personal. And you can feel very stuck and like there's no way out. Because let's be honest, let's say this is happening at work. It's hard to look for a job, it's time consuming. That can be a full job in itself. So you might feel like you're backed in a corner. But then you have to flip the lens and not be a victim, like you said, of the behavior, and do what you can, be an advocate for yourself, bring in other people, start job searching. I mean, these are not easy things all the time, but if you don't trust that person in your gut, they're talking for you, about you, in a promotional way, you're probably right that they're not saying what you would want them to say about you. So, advocate for yourself. And when you switch that victim mentality, which I'm not belittling it because it feels awful, just there's so much more you can do. And sometimes it feels like this job, this is my life, it's the only thing I can do. But you'll be surprised that there are other gateways out there that might introduce you to a whole new path and something even better.
Yeah, and it just goes back to what you said at the beginning. When people are secure and confident, then they're going to lift others, they're going to celebrate
Yeah.
others, and there are those people out there. It's I always like to encourage women when it comes to promotions not to just switch jobs, because that's the thing that we tend to do. We have this tendency to just switch jobs. We want a different career, whatever's not going right. We wanted a promotion or a bigger raise, but we don't actually address it and advocate for ourselves. We just flee the situation. Do you think that's generally best here as well, to try to advocate for yourself before you just go and find another job? Should you see if, I mean, you might not be able to make it work,
Yeah.
and leaving may be the best option, but is that
I think if it comes to leaving, it's probably gone on for a long time. And if you're, that's a good question, but it's a tricky answer, because when you're in it and you're feeling squished down and you're losing your sparkle and shine, it can be hard to be an advocate for yourself when you're losing your own self confidence by being on the receiving end of this behavior that maybe a lot of other people aren't seeing. So it might be hard to describe it to others. It will be hard to describe it to others. But you're right. I also think you need to look at, is this organization, this company, something that I want to work for. And it may not be either if this type of behavior is going on, and if it's not a psychologically safe environment, which means they're condoning this type of behavior, then is that what you want? So there's a lot of hard questions I think you need to ask. I do think though, when you're in it's hard to be an advocate for yourself, especially if it's been an ongoing behavior. So maybe quitting is the reprieve, but if this is your dream job and you worked your tail off to get there, by all means do what you need to do, because, and I'm not saying push somebody else out of their job, but just bring the behavior out in the open so it's communicated and talked about, and there's a transparency that it won't be acceptable.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you for sharing those insights. And so two other things are popping up. One is, okay, so you said if the company is condoning this type of behavior.
Yeah.
So is this obvious? Obvious? Is it evident to other people? And is there something like, if we're noticing that this is happening, what can we do? What should we
Yeah.
do if we feel like maybe this is happening? And then do you have any statistics around how many people face this type of behavior in the workplace? How many people are victims of this rivalry
No,
behavior?
I wish I had that statistic. It would be amazing. Sometimes I think there is an awareness. Sometimes I think there's a complete unawareness, because often good women will walk and they just are done and they won't say why. So it goes back to that. They may not consciously be supporting the negative behavior, but it goes back to having a psychologically safe working environment. If you have a psychologically safe environment where people feel vulnerable to be themselves, where they can ask questions, where they can come as they are and be who they are and be welcomed and accepted for that, then there isn't a fear to raise your hand if there's a problem. So if it's not a psychologically safe environment, there is a fear to raise your hand when there's a problem, because you don't know who has your back, if you'll be protected or supported. So I don't know that this would be an overt behavior that people are always seeing, and probably even not, because it's so intangible. But if you've had somebody that over the years is a serial rivalry person, like maybe other women have gone and they don't know why. Maybe they're afraid of her, in management or in HR. So, I mean, there's lots of different scenarios, but I truly believe that if you have a psychologically safe environment where there's open, transparent communication, a lot of these type of negative behaviors would come out in the open, and there would be repercussions for it.
Absolutely. And for me, I know I mentioned at the very beginning, I didn't realize that I had some of these tendencies before, but I did.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't until I took the DISC assessment, which is a
Yeah.
communication assessment,
Mm-hmm.
and realized that I was a D personality. And many other women are not D personalities. And so there were certain personality types where it's just was this unawareness or ununderstanding of how they're processing things differently.
Yes.
And so it wasn't necessarily intentional, but I also feel like I created more of something that than needed to be. But it was once I had this awareness of my personality style and how to effectively communicate with people with other personality styles, which is why I think
Mm-hmm.
it's so important to teach people and help us identify and understand better communication. I think communication is at the root of
Oh,
everything.
everything.
Solves so much. But just help us understand, how do we recognize this behavior in ourselves?
So I think to a degree we've all had it, whether it's intentional or not. I think I know in high school I had some of it. I'm not proud of it. Probably in college too. I don't remember distinct things, but I think I call it your inner she bully, that little voice that's kind of back here on your shoulder talking sometimes, and sometimes she's not so nice, and that's, who you have inside of you. And I think sometimes she needs to be reeled in, and that goes back to women who like themselves like other women. So I think it's like you said, assessing what my behavior is and how it's impacting others. So many, when I did my research, there were so many themes that came out. I think a lot of women, I'm generalizing, but what I've known to have occurred is a lot of women were very strong in their personality, very assertive. They were go-getters. They might have been type A. They were perfectionists, like a lot of these very strong traits that can be off-putting to somebody if they are not that same way. And so as a result, that other person might feel unsure about themselves. It's not anything you've done, it's how they are in their own skin. But that's when women would tell me about how these rivalries started or give me the foundation of what occurred, that's what I saw. So I think it's always good to practice the pause. I think it's good to, reflect before you respond, and just sometimes sit and take a look at who you're interacting with, to see what other personalities are like. It's not saying change who you are. I don't think that's it at all. I just think it's good to reflect and be aware. Self-awareness is key.
Yeah, I love that because it really is the beginning of it. When we have this awareness, then we can make sure, because it does go back to what's that intention, what's that motivation behind
Yes.
it? Are those pure? Do we have those pure intentions? Because
Mhm.
there's still work that we have to do. And, the last thing we want is going around classifying people as bullies when actually they're just being assertive leaders.
Yes.
And so, really asking yourself, would you feel the same way if another colleague, perhaps of a different sex, also was saying these things to you? And so, it really goes back to that intention. And I love what you said about the pause, the self awareness, and then having these conversations. And I think that's so important, right? The
Yeah.
more that we can allow ourselves to accept things, to develop, to grow, to have conversations, to be part of those solutions, the better off we are. It's just, yes. Wow.
Oh,
Dr. Tishner,
thank
you
you.
have been so incredible today. Everything incredibly valuable. I know that you have a free gift for everybody. So why don't you tell them about that free gift right now? And then we'll go ahead and wrap up. I just have a few other questions for you.
Sure. So I have a free download called Why Good Women Walk, and it has some of the key traits of, what may be happening. What is this elephant in the boardroom? And if you are experiencing things at work, or if you're kind of having that gut feeling that something may be not right, this might be something that would be insightful for you if you're dealing with a frenemy or a mean girl at work.
Wonderful. And so we will put that link in the show notes so you can get that there, along with ways that you can connect with Dr. Tishner, because I know that you'll absolutely want to be following her on the social media so you can just have this in your awareness and continue to learn more from her. So, who would you say has been the most influential woman in your life and why?
Without a doubt, it's my mom. She is one of 14 children, and she is the only one in her family that has gotten a PhD. And so she was in the educational realm and ended up being a superintendent at an international school. But I just saw the barriers that she broke, but the way she interacted with people. And also, she was such a huge encouragement and support, for everything in my life, but also when I got my dissertation and my PhD. And yep, that's a no brainer. That's my mom.
Wonderful. And if there's a woman listening today and she is thinking that, she's ready for that next step in her career, but she's lacking a little confidence or a little uncertainty, what would you say to her?
Go for it. Face your fears head on, because you have it in you to take that next move. And when you embrace I think sometimes if there's not fear, then is it the right move? I think it good fear is a healthy fear, and I think it can push you to be better. And if you're not always kind of working and striving to be better, then you can become a little bit stagnant. So embrace the fear head on. Try to do something, I won't say daily because you'd be really busy, but try to do something frequently that scares you. And you'll be amazed that when you start making these milestones, how wonderful you feel, because it will feel great. Like, like I did it.
Incredible, incredible. Wow. Well, you shared so much incredible information. So, as we wrap up here today, is there anything that you wish I would have asked you, or any final words of wisdom that you would like to leave the listeners with?
I loved our conversation. Thank you. One thing I mentioned it, I think briefly, but one thing women have told me when they are in this behavior is how alone they feel. Like that is one of the main common themes that I get. And that's tragic to me. It's heartbreaking, because I don't want anybody to feel like they're alone. And so, um, it happens way more than you know. In fact, it's very rare that I haven't met a woman that hasn't experienced some type of rivalry at some form or another. So just know you're not alone. Just know that there are people you can talk to. Um, and that you can trust other women, because when you find the right circle or tribe or group, no matter the size, it's amazing what you can do together. So reach out if you have questions. I'm happy to help or answer them.
Well, thank you, Dr. Tichenor. And thank you, listeners, for joining us today on this incredible episode of The Mary Jervich Show. We never take it for granted that you would take your time to be here. And I just want you to be encouraged, because if you are in one of these situations and you are feeling lonely and you are feeling hopeless, I just want you to know that God is with you. He is for you, and He is fighting for you. So I would just encourage you to also go into prayer throughout this time if you're feeling these things, and asking God, what is the right step for you? Because sometimes God sends us into place where we go into battles. We aren't always in these perfect places of peace, but God can bring peace within us, even in the battle. So just remember, no matter where you are in your career journey, that God is with you, God is for you, and just continue to seek Him and His will. And until we meet again, remember, you are only one plan away from your next promotion, and God, He's not done with you.
Hey friend, thank you for listening today. Be sure to join us next week for another great episode. If you receive value from today's show, I'd appreciate it if you would leave us a 5-star review to help others learn about the show. And if you're ready to fast track your career and increase your income, impact, and joy, then head on over to maryjervich.com and check out the Masterclass that teaches you how you can advance too. I'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. This and so much more can be found in the show notes. I look forward to seeing you soon.